Welcome to Everyday English Learning. Today, we invite you on a journey into the Japanese secret of Ikigai, the reason for being, the reason you wake up each morning. In this story, you'll discover the 4 circles of Ikigai: what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, along with the Okinawan secrets of longevity and happiness. As you listen, you'll not only practice English, but also find inspiration to live a more meaningful life. So sit back, relax, and let everyday English learning guide you through the beautiful path of Ikigai. Chapter 1: The Search for Purpose. There was once a young man named Daniel who lived in a busy American city filled with skyscrapers, endless traffic, and people rushing from one appointment to another. Daniel was 28 years old, working in an office job that paid the bills but left his heart empty. Each morning, his alarm clock would ring, and he would drag himself out of bed, sipping coffee not out of joy, but out of necessity, and he would stare at the mirror, wondering why he felt so restless. Friends told him he was lucky. After all, he had a paycheck, a small apartment, and a few material comforts. But inside, Daniel felt as though life was passing by without meaning. He longed for something more, something that would make him excited to wake up each day. But he could not name what that something was. On weekends, he tried distractions, going out to bars, scrolling endlessly on his phone, binge-watching shows, and yet the emptiness always returned. He asked himself in quiet moments, "What am I really living for? Why was I even born?" It was during one such restless night, while searching the internet for motivation, that Daniel stumbled upon a word he had never seen before: Ikigai. The article described it as a Japanese concept meaning reason for being, a reason to wake up in the morning, a path to a long and meaningful life. Something stirred in Daniel's chest as he read. The article showed a simple diagram with 4 circles intersecting: what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. In the center, where all 4 overlapped, was Ikigai. Daniel leaned closer to the screen, fascinated. Could it be that the missing piece of his life lay inside these 4 questions? Could it be that thousands of years of Japanese wisdom held the secret he was looking for? He bookmarked the article, but felt an urge for more, a deeper understanding. That night, he could not sleep. He kept imagining how his life might change if he discovered his own Ikigai. The next day, during lunch break, he walked to a bookstore near his office, and there, as though guided by fate, he found a book titled Ikigai, the Japanese secret to a long and happy life. He picked it up, opened the first page, and began to read stories of Okinawa, an island in Japan famous for having the highest number of centenarians in the world. He read about smiling grandmothers who still gardened at the age of 90, old fishermen who went to the sea every morning, and elders who danced, sang, and played with great-grandchildren with energy that seemed endless. What amazed him most was not just their longevity, but their joy. These elders did not fear old age. They embraced it. They did not rush toward retirement as an escape. Instead, they saw each day as a gift to continue their purpose. Daniel closed the book with goosebumps running down his arms. He thought, if they can find a reason to live with such joy, even at 90, surely I can find mine at 28. That evening, instead of watching television, Daniel took out a notebook and wrote 4 questions. What do I love? What am I good at? What does the world need? What can I be paid for? He stared at the blank page. At first, nothing came. He felt discouraged, But then he remembered that Ikigai was not a quick answer. It was a lifelong journey. The book explained that Ikigai is discovered not through sudden lightning, but through small, mindful steps. So Daniel wrote just one word under "What do I love?" He wrote stories. He had always enjoyed reading, writing, and even listening to the life experiences of strangers. He remembered how, as a child, he would sit in his grandfather's lap, listening to tales of the past. That small spark gave him hope. He realized the path to Ikigai would not be instant, but he had taken his first step. That night, Daniel felt lighter. For the first time in years, he looked forward to tomorrow, and so began his journey. A journey to discover not just success, but meaning. A journey guided by the wisdom of Ikigai, which whispered softly, "Your reason for being is waiting for you to uncover it." Chapter 2, The Circle of Love, What You Truly Enjoy. Daniel sat by the window of his small apartment with the book about Ikigai resting on his lap, and as he looked out at the evening city lights, he kept thinking about the first circle of Ikigai, what you love. The book described this as the place where your heart feels alive, where time disappears, and where joy itself becomes your compass. Daniel thought back to his childhood days, when he would spend hours writing little adventure stories on scraps of paper, dreaming up characters who explored secret islands or saved kingdoms. He remembered the thrill of reading novels under his blanket with a flashlight, unable to sleep because the story was too good to pause. He even remembered how happy he felt when he told stories to friends at school, making them laugh, or when he listened to his grandfather's gentle voice, sharing memories of life on the farm. Somewhere along the way, adulthood had buried these passions beneath bills, deadlines, and responsibilities. But now, as he wrote the word stories in his notebook, he realized it was still there, waiting to be uncovered like a treasure chest hidden under dust. The more Daniel thought about it, the more examples surfaced. He loved not only stories, but also the small rituals around them, the smell of books, the way words could change a mood, the way a sentence could carry hope into someone's heart. He recalled a time in college when a friend was going through a breakup, and Daniel had told him a story about resilience, and his friend had smiled for the first time in weeks. That memory now felt like a clue, reminding him that love is not just about hobbies, but about the things that make us feel most alive, the things that connect us to others. Daniel's mind wandered to Okinawa, to the stories he had read about grandmothers who still danced in the community square, their faces glowing with joy, and he realized that love can be as simple as dancing, gardening, cooking, painting, or laughing with friends. The elders in Okinawa did not stop doing what they loved because they grew old. They lived long precisely because they kept doing it. Daniel reflected on how society often told people to be practical and to abandon childish loves. But here was wisdom from the world's longest living people saying the opposite. Your loves are not distractions. They are life-giving sources of energy. That evening, Daniel tried an experiment. Instead of scrolling on his phone, he sat at his desk and began to write. At first, it was clumsy. The words did not flow as they once had, but soon he found himself lost in the story. Hours passed like minutes. When he finally looked at the clock, it was past midnight. Yet he felt refreshed rather than tired. This was flow, the state described in the book where action and awareness merge, where you lose yourself in the joy of doing. Daniel smiled, realizing that he had touched the first circle of Ikigai. He had rediscovered something he loved, something that gave him energy rather than drained it. He did not yet know how this would fit into the other circles, but for now, it was enough to feel that spark again. The lesson was clear. The path to purpose begins with love. Not with money, not with obligation, but with the small flames that make you feel truly alive. And as he closed his notebook for the night, Daniel whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." Chapter 3. The Circle of Skill. What you are good at. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, not because of his alarm clock, but because he felt a quiet excitement pulling him from sleep, and as he brewed his coffee, he kept thinking about the second circle of Ikigai. What you are good at. Love alone, he had realized, was not enough. If he loved writing, but never practiced it, never sharpened it, then it would remain a fragile dream rather than a strong foundation. He remembered how the book explained that being good at something was not about natural talent alone. It was about persistence, discipline, and the steady joy of practice. Daniel thought about the Okinawan fisherman described in the pages of the book, who had spent his entire life perfecting the art of casting nets and reading the sea. The man's hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with precision and grace, as though the ocean itself had trained him. That was skill, born of decades of repetition, patience, and love. Daniel asked himself honestly, "What am I good at?" His mind listed small things. He was decent at writing. He was good at listening. He had a knack for explaining ideas in simple words, and he had always been told he was creative. Yet he also felt the sting of doubt, because for years he had neglected these strengths, choosing instead the safety of an office job, where he typed emails and attended meetings. But then he reminded himself that skill is not a fixed gift. It is a muscle, and muscles grow with use. He remembered the Japanese concept of Kaizen, continuous improvement through small steps, and he thought that maybe he could rebuild his skills just as those Okinawan elders rebuilt their health each day with small, consistent habits. So Daniel decided to start small. Every day after work, he would write for 1 hour, no matter how tired he felt. At first, the sentences were stiff, the paragraphs awkward, but slowly, like clay, taking shape under steady hands, his words began to flow more naturally. Some evenings he would read what he wrote aloud and realize he was not as bad as he feared. Encouraged, he began to study the craft more seriously. He read books about storytelling, watched videos about writing structure, and even signed up for an online writing workshop. Week by week, his confidence grew. At his job, when colleagues struggled to explain ideas during presentations, Daniel found himself stepping in to rephrase concepts in clear, simple language. And each time, people nodded with relief and said, "That makes sense now." He felt a warm pride. Perhaps clarity was one of his skills. On weekends, he began writing short essays and posting them online. And to his surprise, a few strangers commented that his words had inspired them. It was a small beginning, but it showed him that skill and love can reinforce each other. The more you practice what you love, the better you get, and the better you get, the more you love it. Daniel thought of the Okinawan elders again. The 90-year-old gardener who still knew how to coax life from the soil. The 85-year-old woman who played the shamisen with perfect rhythm. The old craftsman who still built furniture with precision. None of them became masters overnight. Mastery was simply the reward of showing up every day with presence. Daniel realized that skill was not about competing with others. It was about becoming more fully yourself. As he closed his notebook one evening, filled with new pages of writing, he smiled and thought, "I may not be perfect yet, but I am better than yesterday. That was enough. He was learning the second circle of Ikigai, the joy of becoming good at something you love, and the peace of knowing that growth itself is purpose. Chapter 4. The Circle of Service. What the World Needs. As weeks passed, Daniel grew more confident in his writing. But one evening, as he sat staring at his notebook, he felt a new question stir in his chest. Was this journey only about himself? Or was there something larger he was meant to touch? That thought led him to the third circle of Ikigai. What the world needs. The book explained that purpose cannot exist in isolation, because while love and skill nourish the individual, service nourishes the soul. Daniel thought about the Okinawan principle of Moai, small groups of lifelong friends who come together to support one another through joy and hardship. In Okinawa, people did not live long merely because they ate vegetables or moved daily. They lived long because they belonged to something larger than themselves. Community was their heartbeat. Daniel remembered a moment from his own life when a colleague at work had been struggling silently, drowning in deadlines and stress, until Daniel had offered to help reframe her project in simpler terms. She had looked at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you. I was feeling invisible." That small act had not cost him anything, yet it had lifted someone else's burden. He realized that service was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about presence, about seeing the unseen, hearing the unheard. He began to wonder, could his writing serve others in the same way? What if the stories he wrote were not only for his own joy, but also for the healing of those who read them? He started experimenting by posting short reflections online, not just about fiction, but about life lessons, tiny parables about resilience, kindness, and hope. To his surprise, comments trickled in from strangers across the world. A mother in India who said his words helped her encourage her son, a student in Brazil who said his post gave him strength during exams, a man in Canada who said Daniel's reflection reminded him to call his elderly father. Each message filled Daniel with a quiet awe. He realized that the world is hungry for encouragement, for reminders that life is still beautiful, for voices that say, "You are not alone." He saw that while his circle of love and skill had given him joy, it was only when those circles touched others that true purpose began to glow. Service, he discovered, does not drain energy. It multiplies it. Daniel thought again of Okinawa, the elders who woke each morning not asking, "What do I want to do today?" but, "Who can I serve today?" Whether it was cooking for grandchildren, teaching a skill to neighbors, or tending a garden that fed the whole community, their lives extended outward, and in that outward flow, they found vitality. Daniel began to practice this in his own small ways. At work, he volunteered to mentor new employees. On weekends, he visited a local library where children gathered, and he offered to read stories aloud. His voice shook at first, but when he saw the children's eyes sparkle, he felt a joy deeper than anything his paycheck had ever given him. Slowly, he understood that Ikigai is not about living in the spotlight, but about shining light into someone else's darkness. And each time he did so, his own shadows grew smaller. As he wrote in his notebook that night, Daniel penned a new sentence under the question, "What does the world need?" He wrote, "The world needs hope. The world needs kindness. The world needs voices that remind us we are connected." As he set his pen down, he realized he had touched the third circle of Ikigai, and his life was beginning to widen like ripples across a pond. Chapter 5. The Circle of Livelihood. what you can be paid for. Daniel had now touched 3 circles of Ikigai: what he loved, what he was good at, and what the world needed. But there remained a 4th question staring at him from his notebook. What can you be paid for? At first, the question made him uneasy, because money had always been a confusing subject in his life. He had taken his office job for stability, not passion, and though it covered his rent and groceries, it had left him restless. He knew the danger of chasing money alone, yet he also understood that without some form of livelihood, survival became difficult, and the joy of love, skill, and service could be overshadowed by constant financial worry. The book on Ikigai had warned of this balance. Some people live only for money and feel empty, while others reject money entirely and struggle with insecurity. True Ikigai was about weaving passion and income together, finding a way to sustain life without losing soul. Daniel remembered reading about Okinawan elders who sold vegetables at small markets or crafted handmade tools. They did not work for wealth, but for continuity, for dignity, and yet the modest money they earned supported their households. Work was never retired. It was simply adjusted to fit the rhythm of age. Daniel thought about his own writing. Could stories become not only a passion and a service, but also a livelihood? The idea frightened him, because to tie money to love sometimes risked corrupting it. But he also knew that if he wanted to dedicate more time to his purpose, he would need support. Tentatively, he began exploring. He submitted one of his essays to an online magazine, not expecting anything, and to his surprise, it was accepted. He received a small payment, barely enough for a week's groceries, but when he held that check in his hand, he felt something shift. For the first time, his words had tangible value in the world. Encouraged, Daniel started freelancing in the evenings, helping small businesses write articles or editing content for students. The tasks were simple, but each job sharpened his skill and gave him practice. Soon, he realized that the money itself was not the true reward. It was the validation that his passion had a place in the marketplace. At work, when he was asked to prepare reports, he began crafting them not as dull documents, but as clear, story-driven pieces. And his managers noticed. "You have a real talent for communication," one supervisor remarked. "Have you ever thought about leading a content strategy team?" The comment startled Daniel. Could his career itself bend toward his Ikigai? He realized that finding livelihood within purpose did not always mean quitting everything and starting anew. Sometimes it meant reshaping the work already in front of you. He remembered the story of a Japanese craftsman who had built the same style of teacups for 50 years. Though they sold for modest sums, the man's dedication turned each piece into art, and buyers across Japan sought them out. It was not wealth that mattered, it was sustainability. Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Livelihood is the anchor of Ikigai. It grounds passion, skill, and service in reality." He imagined a future where his mornings began not with dread, but with writing, mentoring, and creating words that both helped people and supported his life. That thought filled him with relief, because it meant he did not have to choose between survival and purpose. He could weave them together. One night, as he closed his journal, Daniel whispered, "I can live from this." For the first time in years, the thought of money did not tighten his chest. It softened it, because he now saw money not as the enemy of purpose, but as its partner. And with that, he had touched the 4th circle of Ikigai, bringing him to the center where all 4 circles met, the place where love, skill, service, and livelihood merged into a reason for being. Chapter 6. Okinawa, the Land of Long Life. with the 4 circles of Ikigai glowing in his mind like guiding lanterns. Daniel felt an urge to look more closely at the place where this wisdom had flourished for centuries, the island of Okinawa. He read more about it in the book, and the more he learned, the more he felt transported into another world. Okinawa was not like his crowded city of deadlines and fast food. It was a chain of subtropical islands in southern Japan where the ocean sparkled turquoise. The soil was rich, and time seemed to move at a gentler pace. There, people lived longer than almost anywhere else in the world. Not just living long, but living well, often passing the age of 100 with smiles on their faces, laughter in their voices, and vitality still flowing through their veins. Daniel closed his eyes and imagined walking through an Okinawan village at dawn, the air thick with the scent of salt from the sea, roosters crowing in the distance, and elders already awake, tending to small gardens where bitter melons, sweet potatoes, and leafy greens grew in abundance. He saw groups of women chatting as they harvested vegetables, men repairing fishing nets, and children running freely between bamboo fences. What struck him most was that no one seemed isolated. Life was shared, meals were shared, joys and sorrows were shared. In his city, Daniel had often felt invisible among thousands of strangers, but in Okinawa, it seemed impossible to be alone. He read about Moai, the lifelong circles of friends who supported one another financially, emotionally, and spiritually. If someone fell sick, the Moai brought food. If someone's roof collapsed, the Moai repaired it. If someone was lonely, the Moai visited and played music. This was not charity, but life, woven together like fabric. Daniel reflected on how many people in his own country suffered silently from loneliness, sitting in apartments where no one knew their name, and he felt a pang in his heart. Perhaps the greatest secret of Okinawa was not simply diet or exercise, but connection. And yet, health was everywhere. Elders there moved daily without gyms or machines. They gardened, walked, carried baskets, and danced in festivals. Their meals were colorful, filled with vegetables, tofu, seaweed, fish, and green tea. They practiced Harahachi Bu, the habit of eating until they were 80% full, leaving the body light and grateful rather than heavy and sluggish. Daniel realized that in his own life, meals were often rushed and mechanical, but here they were rituals of gratitude. He imagined an Okinawan grandmother bowing before her bowl, whispering, "Itadakimasu," thank you for this food, before eating slowly, savoring each bite. He saw children laughing while eating sweet potatoes, and elders sipping miso soup together, while the sun set over the ocean. He felt a longing in his chest, not just to visit Okinawa, but to bring its spirit into his own life. He thought of the elders who lived with purpose even into their 90s, the carpenter who still built furniture, the fisherman who still cast nets, the teacher who still taught children songs. Retirement, in the Western sense, did not exist there. Work was not an enemy, but a rhythm of life, always adjusted to age, but never abandoned. Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Okinawa is not a place. It is a way of living. It is community, balance, gratitude, purpose." That night, as he sat in his quiet apartment, he closed his eyes and pretended he was in that village, breathing in the ocean air, surrounded by people who lived not for deadlines, but for meaning. And in that moment, he promised himself that he would not just study Ikigai as a theory, but begin to live it as a practice, weaving its lessons into his own days, step by small step. Chapter 7. Secret 1. Harahachi Bu, Mindful Eating. Daniel's fascination with Okinawa deepened as he came across the first of the 4 great secrets to their longevity, a simple yet profound phrase, Harahachi Bu. It meant, eat until you are 80% full. And it was not just advice about food, but an entire philosophy of living. Daniel thought about how often in his own life meals were rushed, eaten in front of screens, or consumed so quickly that he did not even taste them. He remembered countless lunches at his office desk, shoveling food into his mouth while typing emails, never pausing to breathe, and then spending the afternoon sluggish and heavy. He realized that in contrast, Okinawan elders treated eating as a sacred act, a ritual of gratitude and mindfulness. He imagined an Okinawan grandmother, perhaps 90 years old, sitting on a tatami mat before a low wooden table. Before lifting her chopsticks, she would bow her head slightly and whisper, "Itadakimasu," a word that meant not just "let's eat," but "I humbly receive." It was gratitude to the farmers, the sea, the sun, the rain, the plants, and even the life of the fish or vegetables that had become her meal. She would eat slowly, chewing each bite, savoring the flavors, and when her body whispered that it was satisfied, she would stop, not stuffed, not heavy, just enough. This practice kept her body light, her digestion smooth, and her energy balanced. Daniel thought about the science behind it, how overeating strained the body, how calorie restriction extended lifespan in many studies, and how mindful eating improved health. But beyond science, he saw the beauty. It was a way of telling the body, "I honor you. I do not burden you. I listen to you." Inspired, Daniel decided to practice Harahachi Bu for the first time. That evening, he cooked a simple meal: rice, vegetables sautéed in olive oil, and miso soup. Instead of rushing, he set the table carefully, turned off his phone, and whispered, "Itadakimasu," before his first bite. He chewed slowly, noticing textures he had never paid attention to before. At first, it felt strange to stop at 80% fullness, because habit told him to clean his plate. But he paused, put his fork down, and sat quietly. To his surprise, he felt satisfied, not stuffed, but content, his body calm rather than bloated. That night, he slept deeply, and in the morning, he woke with more energy than usual. Over the next weeks, Daniel continued the practice. At lunch, he ate away from his desk, stepping outside when possible. He paid attention to his hunger, listening to when it rose and when it faded. Slowly, he began to notice how much of his old eating had been mindless, snacking out of boredom, eating to soothe stress, finishing meals simply because food was there. Harahachi Bu taught him that eating was not about filling emptiness, but about nourishing life. He remembered another story from Okinawa, elders gathering in groups to prepare colorful meals of vegetables, tofu, seaweed, sweet potatoes, and small portions of fish. The dishes were modest but vibrant, arranged beautifully, eaten together with conversation and laughter. No one ate alone in silence. No one hurried. Meals were both nutrition and connection. Daniel reflected on how in his city, fast food was everywhere, eaten in cars, eaten standing up, eaten without thought. He wondered how much illness and unhappiness came not from food itself, but from the way people consumed it. Harahachi Bu was not only about food, it was about restraint, about knowing that enough is enough, about creating space in the body and soul. He realized that in a world obsessed with excess work, excess consumption, excess noise, the Okinawan secret was radical. Stop before excess, honor balance, trust simplicity. One evening, as he practiced this ritual, Daniel felt a deep gratitude wash over him. He realized that food was not just fuel, It was life transferred from one form to another. Each grain of rice carried the work of farmers, the blessing of rain, the energy of the sun. Each vegetable was a small miracle. By eating slowly, by stopping before fullness, he felt connected to a chain of life far bigger than himself. He understood why Okinawan elders could live with such lightness into their 90s and beyond. They carried gratitude in their bellies, not heaviness. As Daniel closed his notebook that night, he wrote in bold letters, "Harahachi Bu is not about less. It is about more. More life, more awareness, more gratitude." Chapter 8. Secret 2. Joyful Movement. After weeks of practicing Harahachi Bu, Daniel began to notice that not only his eating habits, but his whole way of living was shifting toward mindfulness. Yet, as he read further into the Okinawan way, he discovered another secret, equally powerful: the practice of joyful movement. Unlike the modern gyms in his city, where people stared at treadmills and lifted weights with headphones blocking out the world, Okinawan elders moved not for vanity or competition, but simply because life required it, and because they found joy in it. Daniel read stories of 90-year-old farmers who still rose at dawn to walk the fields, elders who carried buckets of water to tend their gardens, grandmothers who knelt on tatami mats and stood up dozens of times a day, keeping their joints supple and strong. Movement there was not separate from life. It was life. Children ran freely through villages. Elders bent and stretched as naturally as breathing, and even daily chores became small rituals of activity. Daniel thought of his own life. Hours spent hunched over a desk, shoulders stiff, legs cramped, eyes tired from screens. The contrast was sharp. He realized that his body had been designed for motion, not stagnation, and that perhaps the restlessness he felt in his soul was connected to the stillness of his body. So one morning, instead of rushing directly to work, he decided to walk an extra mile through a nearby park. At first, it felt like a small detour, but as the cool morning air filled his lungs, as birds sang in the trees, he felt a strange peace. His thoughts, usually tangled and noisy, began to unwind with each step. He remembered reading that walking was considered medicine in many traditional cultures, and now he understood why. Movement was not only for muscles, but for the mind. Inspired, Daniel began to integrate movement into his day, not as punishment or duty, but as play. He stopped taking elevators and chose stairs. He stood up during phone calls and paced the room. He stretched gently before bed, noticing how his body softened. On weekends, he experimented with activities he once ignored, gardening in small pots on his balcony, joining a local Tai Chi group in the park, even dancing in his living room when no one was watching. At first it felt awkward, but soon he realized how much joy movement could bring when freed from the pressure of performance. He remembered an Okinawan festival he had read about, where elders in bright costumes danced with children late into the night, drums beating, voices singing. These people were not exercising. They were celebrating. Their bodies stayed strong because joy kept them moving. Daniel reflected on how his culture often divided exercise into rigid boxes: 1 hour at the gym, 3 sets of 10 repetitions, while the Okinawan secret was fluid: move often, move naturally, move joyfully. It reminded him of a phrase from the book: sitting kills, moving heals. He began to notice small opportunities for movement everywhere. While brushing his teeth, he did light squats. While waiting for the bus, he stretched his arms toward the sky. Instead of collapsing on the couch after work, he took a short evening walk, watching the sunset, letting his mind settle. And with each act of movement, he felt lighter, more alive, more connected to his body. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, Daniel almost skipped his walk, but something inside whispered, "Go." Reluctantly, he laced his shoes and stepped outside. As he walked under the streetlights, his breath deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and he realized that his stress was melting with each step. He thought about the Okinawan elders, how they had carried the wisdom of movement, not as a chore, but as a joy, and he smiled. He understood now that movement was not about sculpting the body, but about freeing the spirit. As he returned home, he wrote in his notebook, "Joyful movement is not a task. It is a way of saying thank you to the body for carrying me through life." Chapter 9, Secret 3, Moai, the Circle of Friends. As Daniel reflected on Harahachi Bu and joyful movement, he began to realize that even with healthy habits, something deeper was needed to sustain life over decades. That was when he discovered the third Okinawan secret to longevity, Moai. The word meant a circle of lifelong friends. And it was more than just friendship. It was community, woven into the very fabric of daily living. In Okinawa, people did not age alone. From childhood, individuals were placed into small groups of peers who promised to support one another throughout life. And this bond was not symbolic. It was real, practical, and lasting. If one friend lost income, the group contributed money. If one friend fell ill, the group brought food and care. If one friend felt lonely, the group gathered, played music, and lifted spirits. In every storm of life, the Moai was a shelter. Daniel paused and thought about his own world. He remembered evenings sitting alone in his apartment, surrounded by thousands of neighbors he did not know, scrolling through social media feeds that gave the illusion of connection, but left him emptier than before. He remembered times when he struggled silently because he did not want to bother anyone, and he realized that loneliness was a kind of hunger that no food could satisfy. Moai was the antidote. He read a story about 4 Okinawan women who had met as children and, even in their 90s, still gathered every evening to drink tea, share gossip, and laugh until their bellies shook. Their husbands had passed. Their hair had turned white. Their bodies had grown frail, but their spirits were strong because their friendship carried them. Daniel could almost hear their laughter echoing through the streets of the village, and he envied that kind of bond. He realized that in his own life he had acquaintances, colleagues, even a few old friends, but no circle of daily connection, no Moai, and perhaps that absence explained why he sometimes felt adrift. Inspired, Daniel decided to take a small step. He reached out to 2 colleagues at work who seemed equally tired of shallow small talk. He suggested they meet once a week outside the office, just to talk, not about deadlines, but about life. At first it was awkward, but soon they began sharing real stories. Childhood dreams, fears, struggles, moments of joy. One evening, one of his colleagues confessed that she had been battling anxiety for months, and as she spoke, Daniel saw her shoulders relax, as though just being heard had lifted half the weight. In that moment, he realized the power of Moai. Friendship, he discovered, was not about numbers of followers or contacts. It was about depth, about knowing there are people who will walk with you through storms. Slowly, his small group grew. They began cooking meals together on weekends, supporting one another with advice, and even creating a shared savings jar for emergencies, just like Okinawan Moai groups did. Daniel noticed that his own stress levels dropped. Problems at work felt lighter because he could share them. Joys doubled because he had friends to celebrate with. Even his writing improved because he now had people to give honest feedback, to encourage him when he doubted himself. He thought about how, in Okinawa, the Moai was not optional. It was essential. Elders there lived longer, not only because of healthy bodies, but because of healthy hearts, constantly nourished by belonging. One evening, after spending hours laughing with his new friends, Daniel walked home under the night sky and felt a warmth in his chest that no salary or achievement had ever given him. He realized that human beings were never meant to live in isolation. We were meant to be threads in a tapestry, each thread stronger when woven with others. As he opened his notebook, he wrote, "Moai is not just friendship, it is medicine for the soul, a reminder that we do not walk alone." With that, he felt another piece of Ikigai settle into place, and for the first time in years, he no longer feared the idea of growing old. With friends by his side, age itself could become a celebration. Chapter 10. Secret 4. Purpose without retirement. Daniel's exploration of Ikigai had already transformed his eating, his movement, and his friendships, but there remained one final Okinawan secret that tied everything together: the idea that purpose never retires. In his own culture, Daniel had always been told that work was something to endure until 65, after which one could finally enjoy life. Retirement was painted as the golden prize at the end of decades of labor, yet he had watched his own uncle retire only to grow restless, depressed, and sick within a few years. Without purpose, even freedom had become a cage. In contrast, Okinawan elders did not speak of retirement in the same way. They spoke, instead of continuity, of adapting purpose to the rhythm of age, but never abandoning it. A 90-year-old farmer might no longer plow entire fields, but he still planted seeds in his garden. A 95-year-old woman might not run a household, but she still taught her grandchildren songs and dances. A 100-year-old fisherman might not sail into deep waters, but he still mended nets for the younger generation. Their lives were not defined by an endpoint, but by a flow of contribution, and it was this steady current that kept them alive in body and spirit. Daniel thought about his own life and how often he had fantasized about escaping work, dreaming of a future where he could do nothing. But he realized now that doing nothing was not freedom. It was emptiness. Real freedom was the ability to do something meaningful every day, no matter how small. He remembered reading about an Okinawan man who, at age 102, still woke up each morning to tend his vegetable patch. When asked why he continued, he smiled and said, "Because the plants need me." That simple sentence struck Daniel with the force of truth. Purpose did not need to be glamorous, famous, or lucrative. It only needed to connect you to life beyond yourself. So Daniel began to reframe his own vision of the future. Instead of imagining retirement as an escape from work, he imagined it as an evolution of work. Writing might change forms as he aged. Perhaps books, perhaps teaching, perhaps simply journaling stories for his grandchildren. But it would never end, because stories were his way of giving life. He realized he did not need to wait for old age to embrace this philosophy. He could live it now by approaching each day not with the question, "When will this end?" but with, "How can I contribute today?" Slowly, his dread of Mondays vanished. His job at the office still demanded emails and reports, but now he infused them with clarity and storytelling, knowing he was serving others. His evenings of writing no longer felt like side projects, but like pieces of his destiny. And each time he connected with his moai of friends, he saw that sharing laughter and support was also a form of purpose. Months later, as he looked back on his journey, Daniel realized that he was no longer the same restless young man who had once stared at his reflection in the mirror, asking, "Why am I alive?" He now woke with a sense of direction, guided by the circles of Ikigai. He ate mindfully, he moved joyfully, he belonged deeply, and he lived purposefully. He knew challenges would still come, loss, illness, disappointments, but he also knew that Ikigai was not about avoiding suffering. It was about carrying a light strong enough to guide you through the darkness. One evening, as he wrote in his journal, he summarized his discovery in one final sentence. Ikigai is not found in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary days, lived with love, skill, service, and purpose. And as he set down his pen, he felt a quiet peace settle over him, the kind of peace that Okinawan elders carried into their 90s and beyond. Daniel smiled, whispering, "This is my reason to wake up tomorrow." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the wisdom of Ikigai here at Everyday English Learning. We have seen how mindful eating, joyful movement, strong friendships, and lifelong purpose can shape a long and happy life. Remember, Ikigai is not a destination. It is the way you live each day with love, skill, service, and meaning. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to Everyday English Learning for more motivational stories and English listening practice. Share this video with friends, and let us grow together as a community of learners and dreamers. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep living with purpose.